Hi, my name is Rick Edgman. I'm your instructor for Mgt602 Production Operations Management. This is the 13th actual lecture in the class, and we began a two-part lecture on LeanEnterprise that focuses more on the Japanese approaches to lean management and lean enterprise methods. Lean manufacturing is often called. After that, we will spend 4 lectures, as I recall, that will be spent on the cultural side of lean. The cultural side is just as important as the tactical side. And so we will spend time there. We will do that specifically with reference to the Shingo model for operational excellence and the model, the supporting principles, and so on that are behind the Shingo model. So today and the following lecture, we'll cover more or less a few methods and a lot of ideas, a little bit of history. So it's a real blend of information that you're going to be seeing in this lecture and the following one. So first is that lean enterprise, lean manufacturing methods have been around for a while, but in terms of their popularization in the West, that is due to 2 individuals out of the United Kingdom. Both with long associations with Cardiff University and other universities in Wales and in that general vicinity, James Womack and Daniel Jones. So they wrote a book that is a very, very worthwhile read, and it will enlighten you in great and glorious ways in terms of lean enterprise and efficiency and effectiveness. And that book is called The Machine That Changed the World. And that is the principal reason that I have this slide up here, is just to show you that this is a reference that is a really worthwhile reference just for reading. Just sit down and read it, a lot of short chapters. And in particular, it focuses on the automotive industry, or the automobile industry more precisely. So if you happen to want a good read and you have some leisure time and you become more interested in lean, then The Machine That Changed the World by Womack and Jones, and they have other books between them as well, would be a very worthwhile read for you. So what are lean systems? As soon as you think lean, you should be thinking about no waste, or as close as we can get to having 0 waste. So lean systems are operation systems that maximize the value added by each of a company's activities by removing waste and delays from them. Just-in-time systems are often what we refer to as the backbone of lean enterprise, lean manufacturing methods. So just-in-time. And those are systems that organize resources, information flows, and decision rules that enable a firm to realize the benefits of just-in-time principles. Now, we've talked about just-in-time a little bit as we've gone through the course. Remember, just-in-time suggests that you obtain exactly what you need just as you need it, so that you have minimal inventory. And if you have minimal inventory, that means that you have more space available for either other use or so that you don't have clutter that gets in the way of your thinking and your movement and so on. Just-in-time systems. So there are a lot of enterprise considerations in implementing lean systems. And when we say implementing lean systems, we mean actually doing it. So there are human costs. Lean system implementation requires a high degree of regimentation, and it can stress the workforce just because it is so regimented, mechanical, robotic almost, in terms of a lot of organizations that have rolled out lean systems. Now, that's not universally true by any means, and in fact, that's one of the reasons that we will look at the Shingo model for operational excellence and the cultural principles and so on that reside behind it. But nevertheless, there is, generally speaking, a fairly high degree of regimentation. And some people like that. Other people feel like they've had handcuffs or a straitjacket put on them in such systems. So it's not for everybody. Cooperation and trust. Workers and first-line supervisors must take on responsibilities that were formerly assigned to middle managers and support staff. And so, for example, if you're looking at a manufacturing line for an automobile, at, say, Toyota or Nissan or Hino, which is the heavy truck division of Toyota, then what you would find is that the car or the truck is being assembled as it goes through a line. You're watching this operation. It's a huge operation. And you're seeing part by part added, or assembly by assembly added to the vehicle as it rolls through this line. But you will see in a lot of places the equivalent of traffic signals, red, green, and yellow lights. Now, if it's on green, that means everything's fine. If it's on yellow, that means that there's a potential problem right there. And if it's red, it means somebody has shut down that line. Now, usually they do that by doing something as simple as pulling a cord. And this is called an andon system, A-N-D-O-N, an andon system. But what that means is that you have people who are involved in the actual assembly, line workers, who have the authority to shut down the line. And then not another thing is passed on or goes through. The entire line shuts down until the found problem is remedied at the place where the problem was found. Now, that's one of those principles that resides in the Shingo model, by the way. It is never knowingly pass on a defect to the next stage. So cooperation and trust is required. Reward systems and labor classifications often have to be revamped so that they are encouraging the right behaviors. There are process considerations. So the way that you perform a process now may not actually be a very good approach to doing it in the future or to doing it in a lean way. Therefore, you may reorganize the way that processes proceed, or you may reorganize the way that an assembly line is organized, and so on. Lean systems do contribute to competitive advantages if they are done well. So queue or lines, we've talked about queuing theory. Queues and delays in reduction speeds throughput. So it is reducing the queue, reducing delays. Naturally then that speeds how quickly things go through in assembly, and it frees other assets, and it helps you win orders. Why? Because you can be more responsive as an organization, as a lean organization. There's built-in quality improvement in lean systems. That is part and parcel of lean systems. In fact, we've talked about the plan, do, study, act cycle, and that sits very much at the core of a lot of lean enterprise, lean manufacturing activities, is quality improvement through things as simple as plan, do, study, act cycle implementation. So quality improvement reduces waste and also helps win orders. Cost reduction, because you now have less waste. You now have more efficient operations. Cost reduction increases margin, or it reduces the selling price. Increases margin or reduces the selling price. So either it increases the amount of profit that you make, or it enables you to sell, pass on the savings, if you will, to sell for a lower price and hence to be more competitive in the marketplace. Variability reduction, that is part of what goes along with quality improvement. Variability reduction reduces waste and helps win new orders. Rework reduction. So because you're not making as many mistakes, you have less mistakes to remedy. Rework. Rework reduction reduces waste and wins orders. So part of the goal behind lean systems is to become faster, to become better, and to become less expensive simultaneously. How do leaders create lean enterprises? Well, it is a process. So first, you have to orient. And a lean enterprise aligns people to a common purpose. Now, we talked about this within the context of Deming's management philosophy and his 14 points for management. We talked specifically about his first point for management, which was constancy of purpose. But the real idea behind that was to get a critical mass of the organization bought in to a unified vision, purpose, and mission, so that you're all marching in the same direction, trying to achieve a commonly agreed upon aim, a common purpose. So first you orient, then you explore, reduce uncertainty. You build the right thing, then you build it the right way. So first you identify what the right thing to build is, and then you continuously improve how to do that better, how to build it better, build it the right way. Then you exploit. As you become more and more efficient, then you have the opportunity to grow and scale ideas that drive business success. And finally, you transform. You foster organizational experimentation and learning. Usually in incremental fashion, that would be very common, as opposed to breakthrough sorts of discoveries or breakthrough improvement levels. But we do have a learning organization. Lean enterprises are about constant learning, usually through something like exercise of the plan, do, study, act cycle across almost all activities in the organization. I will not play this video for you, but this is a video worth watching. It's a company in Ferndale, Washington, and if you will take a look at this video, it'll give you just sort of a picture and an understanding of how so many lean organizations operate on a day-to-day basis. And in fact, even right here, you're going to see something without me playing this video that you will see in greater detail in the next lecture when we talk about something called 5S. And one of those is just look how well organized this is. Look, for example, at this place where the tools go. That is called a shadow board. And so what it is you see all those tools there, and you can see that every tool has one specific place that it goes into. It doesn't go into a toolbox. It has one specific place, easily identified visually. That is a great increase in efficiency often, because it means you're not spending your time looking for tools. You know exactly what's there, what isn't, what's missing. And if you're putting something away, you know exactly where to put it away so that it's easily found the next time that you need it. And that's just a very, very small activity that goes on inside lean enterprises, lean manufacturing plants, is this idea of shadow boards, or 5S. Shadow boards are only a part of so-called 5S, which we will talk about in the next video lecture. So who are some of the famous people? Well, one of the things you want to talk about is the Toyota Production System, or TPS. It is also called just-in-time. It is more the embodiment of just-in-time and how you accomplish that, but often just called TPS, or the Toyota Production System. And one of the best books that you can find that really clearly exposits what the Toyota Production System is a book called The Toyota Way by Jeff Liker, L-I-K-E-R. Jeff is a professor at the University of Michigan. In fact, I think he's actually just recently retired from that role. But in any case, he has a number of really, really good books that are related to lean, but that's the one that's made the biggest impact, the Toyota Production System. Easily found, not particularly expensive. So here's a quote, and it is from Taiichi Ono at Toyota. Now, Taiichi Ono is ordinarily given credit. He was a high-level executive at Toyota, and he is ordinarily given credit for development of the Toyota Production System. In point of fact, the Toyota Production System was co-developed by Taiichi Ono and his mentor, Shigeo Shingo. So remember that before I joined Fort Hays State University, I was the research director for the Shingo Institute. The Shingo Institute is the home of the Shingo Prize for Operational Excellence and some other things as well. But when we say the Shingo Prize, it's because Dr. Shingo endorsed having the Shingo Prize come out of the Shingo Institute, which resides within the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University, and it's been there for more than 30 years. In fact, I'm the only research director that the Institute has ever had, and I still provide some of that service on a pro bono basis. But Ono and Shingo were the co-developers at Toyota of the Toyota Production System. Shingo was Ono's mentor, but he was also a consultant for Toyota. Now, he's been dead about 30 years, but his son continues to be highly involved with the Shingo Institute and is often in Utah or often at various Shingo Institute activities around the globe. So there is still that Shingo influence. And then the last person that you see over on the right side is, I will never say his name correctly, but Shoichiro Toyota, who was president of Toyota at one time, not now. And he said that waste is, quote unquote, anything other than the minimum amount of equipment, materials, parts, space, and workers' time, which are absolutely essential to add value to the product. So when you look at that particular quote, it is really comprehensive in the sense that it says anything that isn't going into value added for that product or for that surface is waste. Okay? Adding value, the absolute minimum necessary. So when you are looking at lean enterprise systems and processes, obviously what you're striving toward is toward zero waste in a sense. Now, there is sort of a catch-22, and the catch-22 is that we probably will never know exactly what the perfect process looks like. And never knowing exactly what the perfect process looks like, never knowing exactly what the minimum is that is required because those things change or because products are redesigned or tweaked or processes are redesigned or tweaked and so on. Because of that, we may never know what that absolute minimum is. We may never get to zero waste. But it is a goal to work toward. Notice what Taiichi Ohno said, everything that consumes resources without creating value. So two very consistent definitions of what waste is. Okay, and what we're trying to do is eliminate waste. That's lean. Lean talks about elimination of waste. So what is waste from my perspective, or the objective of lean? Maybe that's a better way to say it. The objective of lean is to recover all that value that you've been flushing down the toilet due to poor processes, poor relationships, poor communication, poor use of your equipment, inefficient processes, inefficient use of your space, inefficient time use, and so on. In other words, you have been flushing money down the toilet. And what you're trying to do with lean, a lot of people talk about lean and how it generates increased profits. It doesn't. Okay, what it does do potentially, if you do it well, is it recovers that money that you've been flushing down the toilet. That's lean versus Six Sigma, which looks at some of that, but additionally creates new value. So we'll talk about that when we get around to talking about Six Sigma. So here are some illustrations of waste, and they're keyed on poor communication fundamentally. So there's how the customer explained what they wanted. The project leader understood it in a different way. Well, that's not a very good working model for a swing. The analyst designed it that way. Fantastic, except you're not going to hold your tree up very well. The business consultant described it very differently. The project, how the project was documented, it wasn't. What operations installed? Just a rope, only one of the two. How the customer was billed, extravagantly, and what the customer really needed or wanted was just a tire swing. So you can see that they're all after the same thing, but because they understand it differently due to poor communications, let's say, you have a lot of potential waste that is involved. And there is waste that's visible and there's waste that isn't. So the sort of waste that's visible that's easy to track are things like defects, rework, scrap, overruns on production, cost of inspection, things like that. Less visible are all those things that you see below the waterline. So this is the equivalent of an iceberg, where the vast majority of the iceberg is underwater and you only see what's out above the waterline. So, but there are all those other things that are less visible but nonetheless waste. They are the major contributors to waste, in fact, ordinarily speaking. So when we talk about lean enterprise methods, responsible operations management implies that there is a substantial commitment to lean enterprise management, manufacturing, and service methods. And most of the time, we just talk about lean. We don't say lean enterprise. We don't say lean manufacturing. We just say lean. And when we say that, it's understood that we're talking about all of these things. So what do they consider? They consider efficient and effective use of resources through a lens that regards waste or resources used for any objective other than value creation for the end customer as waste. Well, there are a lot of potential sources of waste, as you just saw on that iceberg graphic that you saw just a moment ago. So in relation to waste, there are different categories of waste. One of those categories, the Japanese word is muda. Okay. So there'll be three categories, three M's, each of which is a Japanese word. And I will try to point those out as we go through. So muda. Improving processes and their outputs means that you serve customers better, faster, and less expensively, so that the overall essence of lean enterprise focuses on preservation or enhancement of value based on reduced consumption and more effective and efficient use of resources. And that does derive from the Toyota production system as we described. Those three sources of waste or three main categories of waste are muda, muri, and mura, all of which begin with that Japanese prefix that you can see, mu. And usually that's associated with improvement efforts. So muda, you're using the Chinese characters, Japanese characters, Chinese characters. Japanese uses Chinese characters. Muda translates as any of the following near synonyms because it's how you translate those symbols. Futility, uselessness, idleness, I can never say this without thinking through it. Superfluous would be the word that comes out of that. Waste, wastage, and wastefulness. So there are 7 original muda, and we've added another one. So those 7 original muda we can organize into 2 words that spell now time. Now time. And then we add an 8th one. Now time plus 1, if you will. So, and you'll see what those are in just a moment. So compared to muda, there's muri. And I'm probably mispronouncing it. So let's just say muri. It translates in most contexts as being unreasonable, impossible, what's beyond your ability or authority to control. Okay? In some contexts, it translates as having been forced or having been compulsory or excessive or immoderate. So it's over the top, so to speak. It's either over the top or beyond your ability to control. Now, within the lean context, a lot of times we say that mura, the last of the 3 M's, translates as unevenness or irregularity or non-uniformity or inequality. So that's the 3 categories that we would look at. And I will let you read a little bit more about those 3 words and how they fit together. But where I really want to get to would be some of these core principles and processes. So, Lean Enterprise core principles. First, you want to satisfy customer expectations by engaging only in value-added activities. Second, you want to define the value stream. That's the information and the material flow and the obstacles across the entire production production process, from order placement to delivery to the final customer. Identification and elimination of everything except that which is lean or just enough is called waste. And we want to identify anything that is beyond lean or just enough at all levels in all activities of the business with the goal of continuous improvement. We don't expect to ever reach perfection. Perfection is a moving target, for one thing. It's an ever more rigorous standard. But what we do expect to be able to do is to continuously improve. The rate of improvement is important, but to continuously improve. Rate of improvement is important. Where you're improving, what you're improving, those things are important as well. Lean Enterprise core processes. You just saw the principles, processes. identify what constitutes value. Transform the value stream in a manner consistent with the core principles. Ensure connected, consistent, and level information and material flow across the entire value stream. Ensure response throughout the entire value stream to customer expectations. Strive for perfection in fulfilling the principles throughout the enterprise. And then you get to those 7 traditional types of waste. Now time plus 1. So what are some of the sources of waste? Non-quality. Notice that we've taken some liberty to force that acronym now time on here. Non-quality means that you've got defects. Producing more than you need, overproduction. Waiting, sitting around waiting on things. So you have time on your hand that could have been put to better use. Transportation, that is basically unnecessary transportation of materials and things like that. Inventory, having more than you need. Motion, just unnecessary movement that consumes time and energy. And so one of the big focuses, once you get past the low-hanging fruit, is to focus on motion and to make the motion itself much more efficient. Excess processing, that is incorrect or over-processing of what you're looking at. And then there's that plus 1. And the plus 1 is the unused or untapped human potential, the creativity that they could bring, that you could bring to the table, I could bring to the table, but that isn't being used in the organization. It's not necessarily valued, maybe. This would be a worthwhile video for you to watch. It's from the Gemba Academy. Gemba Academy is one of the main consulting organizations that's out there in the lean world. Now, the word Gemba, and we'll talk about this a little here and there, by the way. The word Gemba basically means go and see. Go and see. And the way that it is operationalized is as going to the place where the work is actually done, so that you can observe how the work is actually done, and then find ways to improve that. So a lot of times you'll hear this phrase in Lean, go to the Gemba. But they just mean go to the place where the work is actually being done so that you can see how it's being done and find ways to improve upon that. So this particular video, if you want to watch it, is one that would be on the now time 7 deadly waste of Lean. If you want a little more description of those, you can find those on these next 2 slides. But in brief, I described those just a minute ago when we talked about the acronym NOW, time, and then the plus 1 for unused employee creativity. So a little more exposition, this slide and the next one. But then there's that 8th one, the unused employee creativity. What does it mean? It means you're losing time from the employee. You're losing their ideas. You're losing their skills that they could be applying, but that you're not asking them to. You're losing learning opportunities, learning from the employee, as well as the employee learning more and new things from excuse me, the organization. And all of those sorts of losses right there are caused by not engaging or not listening to the employee. So what about this Toyota production system? There are 14 principles that have been distilled from the Toyota production system. Now, when I say distilled, these are the principles that Jeff Liker, who I mentioned earlier, who wrote the book on the Toyota production system. These are the 14 principles that Jeff Liker observed. First, base management decisions on long-term philosophy, superseding short-term financial goals. Now, if you relate that, say, back to Deming, remember that Deming said one of his deadly diseases was focus on short-term profits. Whereas in Japan, or in those organizations that are really focused on lean, they're focused on winning the war, not the short-term battle. Not the day, not the game. They want to win the day. They want to win the game, but they're focused on the entire war, long term. So what enterprise purposes supersede goals? Create value for customers and society. Management's responsible for improving value-adding quality. So principle 1, base management decisions on a long-term philosophy that supersedes short-term financial goals. 2, create continuous process flow to surface problems. So we are literally trying to uncover problems. We are routinely looking for problems. We're not waiting for them to occur, although some inevitably will. We are trying to root out problems in the same way that a wild boar or a pig will root out truffles from underneath the surface of the ground. We're trying to root out problems before they occur so that we can fix them before they occur. That helps us redesign work processes to minimize idle time. It helps us to more rapidly transfer material and information. And it helps embed in the enterprise culture, the organizational culture, a value for flow of information, flow of materials. Principle 3, avoid overproduction through just-in-time pull systems. Now, here's the thing. You have to be really good to get to this point. So this is what we called, in earlier discussion in this course, we don't produce except to actual demand. Once we have actual demand, we produce what's necessary. Okay, nothing more, nothing less. So we produce it on time, exactly when it's needed. So that's what a pull system is. A pull system pulls the parts or whatever it is that you need to assemble things exactly when they're needed. At least that's the ideal. Now, we rarely reach the ideal, but we're trying to get closer and closer to that ideal. Level workloads, hijunka. So that is waste elimination. It's 1/3 of lean, right? Muda. Muri, overburden, and Mura, unevenness, still remain. So we're trying to get rid of waste, but there's the other part here, and this is level workloads. So what we're trying to do is minimize batch processing to level workloads. In other words, when we say batch processing, we don't want to have to build 100 Toyota Corollas and then build 100 Toyota some other model and then 50 of some other model. We'd like to be able to produce one piece flow. That's the idea. One piece flow. Where that one piece is that one Toyota Corolla. That next one piece might be a Supra. The next one piece might be a Toyota Tundra truck. The point is that you're trying to get as close as you can to one piece flow to producing what is needed when it's needed. So minimize the batch processing, the large batches, which then puts a lot of inventory on hand to get as close as you can to one piece flow so that you don't have a lot of inventory on hand, inventory cost. Principle 5, found enterprise culture on doing things right every single time rather than on fixing problems. We're not about putting Band-Aids on wounds. We're about making sure the wound is healed and doesn't recur. So we want to surpass customer needs using quality improvement and assurance methods. We want to incorporate problem detection into processes. That is, we don't want to wait until the problem just screams at us. We want to detect and detect as early as possible when it's less costly to correct a problem. Excuse me. We want to ensure the enterprise is willing and able to address quality challenges, and we want to improve productivity. Sometimes that means you stop or you slow down to do things right, rather than doing things wrong, and wrong again, and wrong again, and wrong again, and passing on a defect to later points in the line where defects compound upon more defects, or defects multiply. That is why in something like end-on systems that I described to you in automobile manufacturing production lines, let's say where you have the red, green, and yellow light systems, and pull the cord to stop the system. Correct the problem when and where it occurs as soon as you detect it. And that means that you will be slowing down or stopping what's going on to do things right. But the benefit of that in the longer term is that you surface problems, you correct those problems, and in the long term, you get more production, not less production out of that. You empower employees to standardize tasks and engage in continuous improvement. In fact, you make continuous improvement, often called Kaizen in the Japanese, you empower them to engage in Kaizen. It is not just empower them, it is expect that they engage in continuous improvement in all of their work, the processes that they work with as they go. Use visual control to reveal problems. So for example, you saw that so-called shadow board that I pointed out where the tools were in a place where you could tell exactly what was there, and if you took something out and used it exactly where it should go back, or if something was missing, you knew what was missing, and so on. That's called visual management. We talked about a particular type there called 5S that we'll talk about in the next lecture. But visual control. Sometimes that means that you have a lot of charts and things that are up there to help you understand what's happening in your process as you go. Principle 8, use reliable technology to serve people and processes. The point is technology should support, not replace people. Explore, test, and adopt new technologies. Now, you know that point about technology should support, not replace people. You know and I know that in the longer run, that the nature of work will shift as more and more jobs either become obsolete or the people performing them are replaced by, let's say, robotic systems or something like that. Meaning that we will have to, in the longer run, create new types of jobs and new activities for people that technology may, in the ideal, support people but not replace them. Well, over the longer period of time, jobs, the type of work that's done and what's needed to do it, does change. And that is not a fault of going to lean production. That is the nature of evolution in manufacturing systems, in customer demands, in. It is the nature of evolution, period. Okay? Grow leaders who understand lean philosophy, who understand the enterprise's work, and can teach those things to others. So what that means is that good leadership and teaching requires a deep and detailed process understanding. So we want to grow role model leaders internally that have good people skills. This is almost antithetical to much of what we see in American systems, American companies, where, for example, we bring in the president of a meatpacking company into, let's say, a dairy company. They're not the same industry. There may be some transferable skills and so on, but they're not the same type of company. They might be the same general business sector, but they're not doing the same things. And Toyota Production System, that particular principle about growing leaders internally, would suggest that we don't look to hire from without. First, we look to promote from within. That doesn't mean that we don't hire from without, from the outside, but it does mean that we look to promote and develop from within first. It is very common in Japan still that many people work their entire careers for exactly one company. Develop exceptional people and teams. So create strong and stable culture with widely held shared values and beliefs. Train people to view their work effectively and efficiency. Integrate teamwork and performance incentives and training initiatives. Okay, so that in fact the teamwork becomes a central focus. You're not competing against one another, you're working with one another to become better. On the training, that's part of empowerment. Is a person is not truly empowered unless they have the skills and knowledge necessary to do the job that they're supposed to be doing. So training becomes important there too. And then the last 4 principles of the Toyota Production System. 11, challenge your supply chain and enterprise ecosystem by aiding and rewarding improvement. So suppliers and partners, they're part of your business. We should view them as part of our business. Challenge them to grow and develop if they want to remain one of your partners. Help them meet challenging and mutually beneficial targets. Okay? Help them to help themselves and to help you at the same time. 12, directly observe the situation. Now, you're going to see that those 2 words right there, Genshi Genbutsu. You're going to see that on a graphic here very soon. But the idea is to personally observe the situation and verify the data. It's very much like going to the Gemba that we talked about. Don't think or act based on superficial understanding. Instead, take a very, very careful, slow look at what's happening so that you have that deep understanding. So I told you that Dr. Shigeo Shingo's son, Ritsuo, is still engaged and deeply engaged with the Shingo Institute. He lives in Japan, but engages deeply with the Shingo Institute. I've been on any number of plant tours with manufacturing process tours with Ritsuo. And as you, or myself, let's say, and others are going through and seeing what's happening, and we think we're being very observant, we're practically done, and Ritsuo is way back near the beginning, and he's just standing there and observing. And then later you'll say, what did you learn? What did you see? And the amazing thing now, he's very slow in how he presents things. Part of that is that his English is far better than your Japanese or mine will ever be, for example. However, his English relative to native English speakers is slow. And his personality is a more deliberate personality anyway. He himself has overseen Toyota plants in the US, UK, and China, although he's an accountant by training. But when you ask him what he's seen, he will start telling you about what he saw. And to be honest, he proceeds very slowly, but at some point, he just completely knocks you over with something utterly profound that he's seen that you just brushed over, or that I just brushed over. That man knows how to see, because he is really good at going to the Gemba or directly observing the situation, Genshi Genbutsu. So personally observe the situation, verify the data, go slow. Not superficial, go slow. Take your time. Take the time to understand. If it's been in operation all this time and will operate in the future, then it's worth taking a little extra time to understand it better, to improve it sooner and faster and at a greater level. So when you're in doubt, see it with your own eyes. Principle 13, consider all options. Make decisions slowly. Consensus is highly valued in Japan, so namawashi. But then implement rapidly. Be deliberate, take your time, be careful in your decisions, but once you've made your decision, implement rapidly. And lastly, become a learning organization, popularized by Peter Senge in his 1990 book, Learning Organizations, The Art and Practice of the Fifth Discipline. So become a learning organization through relentless reflection, Hansei, and continuous improvement, or Kaizen. So that means that you've had to establish statistical control over your processes, right? Stable, standardized processes. So when this says this requires stable, standardized processes in Principle 14, think about having established statistical control using things like control charts or alternatives. Search for inefficiencies. Eliminate muda, or waste, by applying Kaizen, continuous improvement approaches. Protect enterprise knowledge by developing stable human capital, but reasonable personnel promotion, and careful succession systems. Standardize best practices so that best practices become routine practices until a new best practice is developed. So let me say, we might refer back to this graphic in the next 2 weeks or so. The Toyota way is described here on the right side of the graph. You can see that these are the 14 principles that Jeff Liker identified within the Toyota production system, or the Toyota way of doing things. Now, those are categorized, let's say, into four areas of this pyramid, or of this triangle. There's the philosophical part, which is long-term thinking. There's the process, which is eliminating waste. There's people and partners, respect, challenge, and grow them. And then there's problem solving, continuous improvement, and learning. The Shingo principles are, generally speaking, wholly consistent with that, although they're organized somewhat differently. Okay, so the Shingo principles are organized, there are 10 of them, and they're organized into 4 categories: continuous improvement, cultural enablers, I said continuous improvement again because there's other types than just the category up at the top. Enterprise and alignment, and then you see down at the very bottom, continuous improvement. So there are, and then there's the results orientation. So the 4 main areas of the Shingo principles are continuous improvement, cultural enablers, enterprise alignment, and results, or performance, if you will. Okay, but we can place those Shingo principles in correspondence with the 14 principles of the Toyota production system. So you see Shingo that resides over on the left side of the graph. You see the Toyota principles that are residing on the right side of the graph, and there is a correspondence between those. And this graph is something that I developed that features fairly prominently in my book. Hold on just a moment. So it features fairly prominently in my book, right here, Complex Management Systems and the Shingo Model, where the Shingo Model is about a quarter to a third of the book. But generally speaking, it is a book that discusses much more fully complex management systems, so that you can understand how systems fit together, why they fit together, and how to improve their performance if, in fact, their performance begins to fail, how to optimize their performance. But we'll talk about that a little more at a different time. A video for you if you'd like to see it, again from the Gemba Academy. And Toyota has a very standardized 8-step practical problem-solving methodology, and that's discussed in this fairly brief video. And then there are Kaizen and selective lean methods. So Kaizen actually has a lot of things to it. So Kaizen is the word for, often translated as continuous improvement in Japanese. And you can see different elements in the so-called house of lean. So some of those are just tools, some of those are more complex. We're not going to cover very many of those in this course. We will talk about, for example, quality at the source. We'll talk a little bit about value stream mapping, as I recall. We'll talk a little bit about 5S. And, we might do a little bit more. So if this were a course on lean, we'd talk about each of these things. But we will instead talk about some selected things that fit within Kaizen, which again is often translated as continuous improvement, popularized by Masaki Imai. Now, Dr. Imai is, he's one of the true pioneers of lean and in general of Japanese approaches to quality improvement. If I'm going to be honest, now that he is very close to the end of his life, he's close to 90 as I recall right now. I've met him a few times. He's very good at remembering the old things. There's the things that he developed and the history and so on and how things work together. He's not particularly sharp these days. He's experienced, I think it would be fair to say, a decline that you often see with age. But nevertheless, if you listen to him talk about some of the history and the old things, he is really sharp and you would learn a lot in that. And so it is worthwhile to watch this short video from Dr. MI, which he has changed the way he's thought about Kaizen later in his life. And he says Kaizen, it's what he calls everyday, everybody, everywhere improvement. That's how he thinks of it, instead of just using those two words, continuous improvement. It is literally improvement practiced every day by everybody, everywhere. So it emphasizes morale-boosting benefits and positive employee participation over economic and financial incentives. It's not that it says that economic and financial incentives are not important. It's that it has a higher purpose first. The idea being that if you accomplish the higher purpose, you will in turn accomplish the economic and financial incentives. So a really worthwhile video, and I would encourage you to watch this one. Note that, of course, you have to be online to see it. So that is the end of this particular lecture on LeanEnterprise. We will pick it up with a second lecture just to add a little bit more, and again, mostly some history and a few tools and things of that sort. So see you next time. This is the lecture for the 15th of March, 2021.